The lead enforcer's hand stopped exactly 2 inches from the woman's throat. Around them, the humid air of the Zenith Trade Hub seemed to congeal, thick with the smell of scorched ozone and cheap synthetic spices. 7 members of the Obsidian Guard formed a jagged circle of slate-gray muscle, their bioelectric knuckles humming with a low, predatory vibration. The woman did not flinch. On her collar, a small circular pulse monitor glowed with a flat, boring shade of green, indicating a heart rate that refused to climb. The galaxy is full of things that look easy to break. You'll want to hear how this ends. 12 cycles of predictable peace had made me soft. As a Xylari peacekeeper, my job at the Zenith Hub usually involved mediating disputes between ammonia-breathing methane miners and crystalline silk merchants. My 4 talons clicked rhythmically against my duty belt, a nervous habit I couldn't suppress as I watched the docking bay monitors. It was a standard rotation until the transport from the outer rim hissed open, venting a cloud of recycled frost. Among the crowd of multi-limbed travelers stepped a human. She was small, even by her species standards, dressed in a faded cotton t-shirt with high-contrast block lettering that read Calypsian Champion. I dismissed it as just another tourist wearing local slogans I couldn't be bothered to translate. She carried a battered datapad like a shield and walked with a strange, heavy-footed grace that suggested she found our station's standard gravity slightly insulting. The human whom the manifest identified as Eris Thorne made a direct line for sublevel 3. This was the salvage bay, a place where the air was permanent rust and the law was whatever the merchant could defend. I followed her on the overhead sensors, my secondary set of eyes tracking the way she moved through the crowd. She wasn't looking for the exits or the luxury kiosks. Her gaze was clinical, scanning the structural supports of the bay as if she were building a casualty map of the entire sector. Eris stopped at a stall run by a spindly Tracknar merchant. He was trying to sell her a refurbished fuel pump, his many hands trembling as he adjusted the price display. He knew what I knew. Behind the stacks of rusted ship plating, the Obsidian Guard was watching. They were the Midrim's most efficient extortionists, led by a brute named Graxus who stood 2.5 meters tall with skin like serrated stone. The price was agreed, Eris said. Her voice was flat, lacking the melodic trills or aggressive hisses of the hub's common tongue. 300 credits for the pump. Your muscle doesn't change the math. I adjusted my authority projector, ready to intervene, but the Obsidian Guard moved faster. Graxus stepped out from the shadows, his dorsal breathing vents puffing out a cloud of gray exhaust. He looked at Eris, then at her cheap cotton shirt and let out a sound like grinding rocks. He placed a heavy, slate-colored hand on her shoulder. The Tracknar merchant retreated into the shadows of his stall, his shaking hands retreating into his sleeves. "Little soft skin," Graxus rumbled, his voice vibrating in my own chest plates. "You pay the hub or you pay the floor." Eris Thorne didn't look at the giant. Instead, she reached out and wiped a small smudge of grease off her datapad with her thumb. It was a move so mundane, so utterly lacking in fear that even Graxus hesitated for a fraction of a second. My sensors spiked. I realized then that I wasn't watching a victim. I was watching a biological anomaly. In standard gravity, most species operate at their peak. Humans, however, come from a Class 12 Deathworld with a pull that would crush my hollow bones. Here, in the hub's light tether, they were operating at 70% capacity. To Eris, we were the ones moving in slow motion. She shifted her weight by 2 centimeters, a movement so subtle my internal scanner flagged it as a glitch. She wasn't preparing to run. She was preloading her muscles like hydraulic pistons. "I'm not here to negotiate the physics," Eris said, her eyes finally meeting Graxus's 4 yellow orbs. "Only the price." The air in the bay thickened as Graxus tightened his grip. My talon clicking stopped. I felt a sudden, cold realization that my authority projector would be useless here. The Obsidian Guard sneered at station laws because they believed in mass and kinetic force. They had no idea they were standing next to a pressurized canister of high-gravity muscle. Graxus lunged, his fingers twitching to crush her throat. This was the moment the sensors would later struggle to play back at normal speed. The lead enforcer's hand stopped exactly 2 inches from her skin, but not because he chose to. Eris had moved. It wasn't a punch, it was a dismantling. Using the giant's own momentum, she pivoted on her left heel, her hand snapping up to catch his wrist. The sound of the bone snap echoed through the salvage bay like a dry branch breaking in a winter storm. She didn't stop. Before the other 6 guards could even process the sound, Eris was among them. She moved with a rhythmic, terrifying percussion. A sweep of her leg sent a 200-kilogram mercenary spinning into a stack of shipping crates. A palm strike to a dorsal vent left another gasping for air that his lungs could no longer process. I watched the screen, paralyzed. My analytical mind tried to track the vectors, but she was too efficient. She wasn't fighting, she was solving a series of violent equations. 7 elite enforcers trained in a dozen planetary combat styles couldn't touch a single hair on her head. They were heavy, slow, and biologically overmatched. One guard tried to activate his bioelectric knuckles, the blue sparks illuminating the terror in his eyes. Eris didn't give him the chance to swing. She stepped into his guard, her shoulder hitting his chest with the force of a falling meteor. The enforcer flew backward, his armor cracking against the bulkhead. The entire 3.2-second sequence ended with Graxus pinned to the floor by a single boot pressed against his throat. The bay went silent. Even the liquid nitrogen bar across the way stopped hissing as the patrons stared. Eris Thorne's pulse monitor remained a steady, flat green. She wasn't breathing hard. In fact, my sensors indicated she had actually suppressed her heart rate further, entering a state of focused calm that made my own blood run cold. She reached down, picked up the fuel pump from the merchant's shaking hands, and placed a small credit chip on the counter. The Tracknar didn't count it. He just stared at her. "Fair price," Eris said. She turned and walked toward the docking bay, her heavy-footed gait unchanged. As she passed the security camera, the high-contrast letters on her shirt caught the light. Calypsian Champion. I finally pulled up the translation in the station's deep space database. It wasn't a tourist slogan, it was a rank. Deathboxing, the entry read. A human recreational activity involving high-impact kinetic strikes under extreme gravity. Participation often results in structural failure of the environment. I looked down at the deck, where 7 of the most feared mercenaries in the sector were groaning in the dirt. One of them was staring at his own hand as if it belonged to someone else. I reached for my duty belt and began a new report, my talons finally still. I realized then that the most dangerous thing about a human isn't their capacity for rage. It's their politeness. It acts as a warning label that the rest of the galaxy is too arrogant to read. Beyond the docking bay, the stars of the Zenith hub continued to swirl in their cold, indifferent patterns. I watched the human's ship detach, a small, unremarkable vessel slipping into the voidway. My partner, Jor, approached me, his skin usually a lazy emerald green. Now it was a permanent, terrified bone white. He didn't ask what happened. He didn't need to. He just looked at the broken slate-skin guards and the empty space where the human had stood. Somewhere in the lower levels, a secondary security alarm began to chime, late and irrelevant. The merchant at the salvage stall finally reached out and touched the credit chip Eris had left behind. His fingers were no longer shaking. He picked up a rag and began to polish the spot on the counter where she had placed the pump, his movements slow and reverent. A single drop of hydraulic fluid fell from the ceiling, splashing onto a discarded datapad. The Tracknar merchant closed his stall, sliding the heavy metal shutters into place. Across the bay, a single green light on a discarded pulse monitor flickered once and died.